Ready? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Animal Care Center Client Education Night in conjunction with the Dog Park. I'm Dr. Pam Nichols. I own the joint, and I have a couple of really important people to introduce to you before Dr. Lindsay takes it away for their presentation. Dr. Stephanie Sheen is one of my doctors. Dr. Lindsay will be presenting. Dr. Lauren is my newest baby doctor from France. Dr. Cara Tassoni. And this is baby Victoria Grace, who's Dr. Cara's baby. She doesn't have anything to say yet. I know that will change, so I need another. The reason I have this young lady up here, this is Anna, and I'm going to cry because Anna just got accepted to veterinary school. She will be our next generation of vets. We're very proud of you.
Oh.
We've got a great presentation for you. Dr. Lindsay has worked really hard to decipher a pet food label. This is not going to be a scientific talk. It's going to hopefully be in terms that you can understand. We'll all be around afterwards to answer questions. Some of us know more than others about pet food labels, and by that I mean I don't, so don't ask me. No, I'm just kidding. We will start now, and we're going to be wrapping up at 7:45, so we got 45 minutes of presentation, and then we'll be all around afterwards to answer questions. If there's someone that's here that you haven't seen before, say hello. We have Scout Snacks here for with Deb and Cindy. They're out front. And if we can do anything to make your evening more fun, let us know. And with that, Dr. Lindsay, tear it up.
I'll take it away. And there's also quite a few of the Animal Care Center staff floating around too, so if one of the doctors is chatting, please feel free. A lot of the girls are in their scrubs, so please feel free to ask them questions as well. So today's talk is going to be deciphering the pet food label. Who walks into the pet store and sees these giant walls of pet food and just looks around totally overwhelmed? This is me every time that I go to somewhere like PetSmart where I say, gosh, there are just so many options. What is the difference between one food and the other food? How do I know if my pet is eating the right thing? And that's a difficult question to ask. So one of my goals for today is for you to look at a bag of food and say, okay, this is what I know about this food based on what the label says. And then go from there, and then just have a great conversation with your veterinarian about what's going on with your pet, what are your goals for your pet, how can we use a diet to make your pet more healthy, and then together we find a diet that meshes really well. All right. So the first thing I just wanted to go a little bit into is pet food regulations. So pet food is regulated in a variety of different ways. There are some federal regulations as well as state regulations. The big thing that I want to point out on this slide is there is an American Association of Feed Control Officials that is a governing body for pet foods. And this is going to be really important when we're looking at pet foods, that each and every pet food that you're considering for your pet has been analyzed by this governing body and said that that food is nutritious for your pet and contains the right nutritional profile for your pet's safety. And that's going to be something that we're going to show you where to look for on your bag of food or the can of food so you know what to look out for. And this is typically what the label looks like. It's letters and then little pictures to the side. So when we're talking about pet foods, we're really breaking pet foods down into one of two areas to look for information. So the first part is this principal display label. So on this display label, you're going to see the pet food name, you're going to see the manufacturer, you're going to see how much of the food is in this bag, and then it's also going to have a few other little words and things. So you might see things like dog food, dog snack, dog treat, cat food. This helps us to break down if it says something like food, then it's formulated to meet your pet's nutritional requirements as a complete and balanced diet. Where it says something like snack or treat, then typically it's not meant to be fed by itself, it's meant to be used as a supplement. So those are some things where we use terminology to help us to decide how is this food formulated. And a lot of times when you're looking at bags of food too, and we'll go over some buzzwords and things later, the whole name of the pet food is designed to be catchy and to draw the eye so that you as a consumer say, ooh, hey, you know, this is bright minds. I'm going to take a closer look at this bag of food. So I'm going to also kind of talk through how do we look past some of the advertising to really get into the meat and potatoes of what this diet is. So product name examples. So when we're talking about foods, the way that they describe the food on the label actually is somewhat regulated. So you can use the terminology on the bag to know what are the ingredients within your food. So if it says 100% chicken, that means that chicken has to be the main ingredient in that food, but it can contain other things like minerals, vitamins, and preservatives. If it says chicken for cats or chicken for dogs, that means that chicken has to make up to 95% or more of that diet. And it only applies to, so that portion only applies to animal products. So if it says soy for cats, you'll never see something like that. This is only meant for the protein sources, so your beefs, your porks, your chickens. If it says something like dinner, entree, formula, supper, then you're having anywhere from 25 to 75% of that protein source within that food. So you can kind of see here how they can use their advertising to sell something that sounds really interesting, but it really changes the makeup of the food. And for some pets, that's much more important than others. If it says chicken flavored, then that means that there just has to be enough flavoring within the diet to let that dog or cat know that that is the flavor source, so that it smells enough or tastes enough like chicken that they're like, oh yeah, this is chicken. But it doesn't necessarily have to have a specific amount of chicken within the diet. Things that say food with chicken have to have at least 3%. So you can kind of see the tricks there. And then if it says light, lean, or reduced, these diets are meant to have a lesser percentage of fat within the diet, so less than 9% for dogs and 10% for cats. And then they have calorie restrictions per pound. So that's a little bit of a change. So especially for our pets that are meaning to lose weight and things, looking for these that can be a little less calorie dense is going to be more important. And then when it says new and improved, so this is a label that pet foods can only use for foods when the formula has been changed within the last 6 months. After that time span, it cannot say new or improved anymore. It has to, the label actually must change to say something different. So if you have a food, so say this said, Bright Minds, new and improved, we know this diet's undergone a formulation change within the last 6 months. Something's different, and then we can dig into looking at the bag more to find out what that change is. All right. And then the next place that we're going to look is the information panel. And I'm actually going to pass around this bag of food so you can see. So the principal display label's the front of the bag. With the information panel, so that is in a few different spots depending on the bag of food. So on this bag of food, it actually lives on the sides. And it actually is both sides, so if you want to go ahead and take a peek. And then on the cans of food, it typically is on the back of the can, just so that way you can know where to start looking. And with this information panel, and I'm going to go into all of these in a little bit more detail, we have what's called the guaranteed analysis, which has a breakdown of what is in the food. It has an ingredient list. It has a nutrition adequacy statement that's going to have that AFCO label with it. And then we're also going to have if there are any specific health claims that the diet makes. So if it's a nutritional diet meant for joint disease or something along those lines, it'll also be stated on the information label. And then it also has the information for if you have questions about these diets that's not clear on the label, how do you contact the company? And when I was actually in vet school in my nutrition class, our professor gave us 5 bags of food and they said, just call these companies, chat about their foods, see where they make them, see what the process is, how they test them. And it's pretty interesting to delve into how different companies make and process their food. So it's pretty interesting. And if you are really interested in what your pet eats, it's a nice avenue to be able to contact the company directly. And then lastly, every bag of food has to have feeding instructions. So they have to give you some idea of how we use this diet to feed your pet. So the guaranteed analysis. So this is a list of things that have to be on the food. So they have to tell you how much crude protein and fat. So they give a minimum level for this diet has to be in the food in each bag. They also tell you a maximum level of moisture and fiber that have to be in that diet. It doesn't have to have any exact information about the specific amounts that are within that food, and it also doesn't have to have any information about the quality of the contents of the nutrients or how easy is this diet digested. These are things that you would actually need to contact the company directly, and they may vary a little bit bag to bag just depending on the food. Some foods are formulated diets, so each diet is going to be very structured and the same, and then others have a little bit of variety just depending on the bag. So that's something that we'll talk a little bit about as well. And then everything is displayed on an as-fed basis. So as we're feeding this diet, as it's described to be fed, this is the level of nutrition that your pet should be getting. So if you would like to feed a crude protein of 23% or more, then you know, okay, this diet would be appropriate for feeding your pet. One of the tricky things when we're looking at comparing diets, particularly moist or wet diets with some of our dry diets, is this as-fed basis, because you actually have to convert these numbers into something that is actually their metabolizable energy components. And that's something that I strongly advise if you have specific questions, get with your veterinarian and they're going to bust out the calculator and go through the specifics of how do we compare two specific diets, particularly if the formulations are not dry diets, or if you're looking at canned or raw. That's when you really get into those calculations to compare apples to apples, because otherwise we're comparing to apples to oranges, and that's not very helpful. So I strongly suggest if you are looking at two different diets and you're saying, you know, I'm not quite sure how these two match up, I want to know what the differences are in levels of protein or carbohydrates or things like that, that's where we break that down for you. The next is the ingredients list. So when we're listing ingredients on the can or on the bag of food, it's listed in decreased order based on weight. So the food that is the highest weight is listed first and then goes in decreased order. So one of the ways that this gets a little bit tricky again is if there's a moisture component. So your proteins and things do tend to be a little bit higher weight, so that's typically listed higher in the ingredients list. Another thing I always have owners look out for is this second note. So we can have a similar ingredient. So in this one I use the example of ground wheat and then wheat fiber. It's both wheat, but because they are different sources, they can split that on the nutrition label and know that we're getting wheat, it's just coming from two sources. So if it's important to you to know how much of carbohydrates and things like that, that's one of the kind of tricks that you can look out for. And this is where we talked a little bit. So we have two different formulations of diets, and this is going to depend on the brand, the manufacturer. We have this variable formula where batch to batch of the dog food, the formulation changes a little bit. This is more common in our generic or name brand dog foods. In our premium dog foods, we tend to see what's called a fixed formula where each diet is exactly the same as the diet before. And that's really helpful, especially for some of our pets that have medical conditions where we want them to be treated with a specific diet, because we want to make sure that every day their nutrition is exactly the same as the day before. So I think of like a diabetic patient. I really want to know every calorie, every carbohydrate that goes in that diet, and this is where the fixed formulas can be very helpful, because I know exactly what that pet got in each cup of dog food. And this is something too that might not be easy to see on the label. You may actually have to contact the company to know if this is a fixed formula or if this is a variable formula.
It's really important to point out that companies can actually change the ingredients in their food for up to 6 months without changing their label. So without a fixed formula, they can change the ingredients and it can say that it has barley, but it really has corn, and you have no idea.
So, Dr. Lindsay, if a food company says that chicken is the first ingredient, does that mean that it's a better food?
Ooh, I know. Not necessarily. I think you have to break down the rest of the nutrition profile and see, and it's going to vary per pet what is most important. Carbohydrates are carbohydrates, proteins are proteins. Most dogs really don't care about the difference between where they get their sources of food. It's just that they get them in the appropriate quantities, so not always. Not always.
Right?
Yeah.
The chicken can be lower because they're weighing it as, this chicken breast, but once they actually process it. The part of the food that's actually that chicken is probably lower than some of those that don't list chicken as the first ingredient because of that moisture that you talked about.
Any other questions? Those are all, and it's just kind of interesting. These are things that if you don't really delve into what is the regulations behind pet food labels and what to look out for, that these are not things that I would look out for when I was looking at a bag of food, or know that I need to double check and make sure that I'm not seeing these little variations. This is honestly one of the most important things that I have owners. So when they talk to me about what food is most appropriate for their pet, the number one thing that I say is it needs to have an AAFCO label. If it doesn't have an AAFCO label, it has not been proven to be nutritionally adequate for your pet. And then the second part that I look at is basing on life cycle. So with our life cycles, we have 3 life cycle designations by the AAFCO. We have our gestation or lactation, so our females that are pregnant and about to have puppies or have recently had puppies and are currently breastfeeding. We have our growth options for our young growing dogs, and then we have our maintenance diets. One thing that I have a lot of questions on is senior. Senior is not a designated life stage by AAFCO, and they do not have a set list of recommendations for senior pets. There are diets that are formulated for senior pets, but it's not a recognized life stage. And then if it says all stages, it's actually incorporating requirements for all 3 of these. So it has to meet those of the highest energy group, which is going to be the lactating females and growing puppies. So an all life stage diet for an overweight 4-year-old Labrador Retriever may not be the best diet for him because it's going to be higher in calorie and it's going to be harder to maintain weight with that type of diet for him. And then too, with the AAFCO label, it will say if the diet is meant to be used as a complete and balanced diet, so that means that diet alone should meet all of the nutrient requirements for your pet, versus if it's meant for supplemental use only. So that's an important thing that I also want to look out for, because many of our entrees or things like that are not actually meant to be fed on their own. They were meant to be fed as a supplement. So seeing that designation is important within the label. And you can see, so it has a few different examples. So on the bottom it says the animal feeding tests using the Association of American Feed Control Officials procedures substantiate that brand-wide dog food provides a complete and balanced diet for maintenance of adult dogs. So that tells me that in an adult dog, that this food is meant for maintenance and can be fed by itself. We don't need to add anything to this diet. Where if this said provides supplemental nutrition for maintenance of adult dogs, then we know, okay, this isn't meant to be fed on its own, and we need to be talking about what else do we need to add to this pet's diet to make sure he's getting everything that he needs. And then this is the part that Dr. Pam chatted on, is how do they know that this food is nutritionally balanced and appropriate for these pets? And it's done by one of two ways. So it's done by feeding trials or laboratory analysis. And feeding trials are the gold standards because that's going to help us to know in patients what is the digestibility of this nutrient, or is what I'm feeding really getting in that dog in the quantities that I need to be everything that that pet needs for maintenance. And then also how are these nutrients interacting with each other. So that's ideal if we can. It will be on the label typically how that diet has been studied. One thing I would say is it's all of these feeding trials are done off of the product family lead. So not every diet in a family tree has had these feeding trials or laboratory analysis. They use the family lead, so their flagstone diet, and they do trials or analysis of that diet and then filter that information down. That's another kind of tidbit as well that's a little bit tricky, because not every food has had an analysis, and if you're curious if your diet has, that's where I reach out to the companies and I ask specifically, with this diet, how has this been tested, and then go from there. Any questions on that, Pam? Did I cover that? Okay. And then the feeding instructions. So every bag of food should have, how do we use this diet? How much should I be feeding my pet? And it's instructions on how much to feed every day. It can be broken up into typically how many cups per day, and then you talk with your veterinarian about how is the best way to give that number of cups per day. And it's a calculated average based on energy requirements. And it can be off as much as 50% based on your pet's specific nutrition requirements and energy expenditures. So those dogs that are couch potatoes that move from the couch to the food bowl, back to the couch, have less energy expenditure than the agility dogs that are running crazy multiple miles a day. So I think that's a nice starting point always, but we want to monitor pets' weights after we've begun them on a course of diet at a specific amount, and then monitor. And we're using a body condition scaling, and I have this really nice one that Purina's made of what is our ideal weight, and our 5 is our ideal dog, where you see this beautiful tucked in waist when you look at the dog from the side, so you kind of see this little curvature up. And then when you look at the dog from over top, he's a little bit thicker in the chest and then narrows in at the waist, almost like an hourglass. And you should be able to too, when you put your hands on the dog's side. I actually love to use my knuckles as an example. So you should be able, when you run your hands over your dog's ribs, to feel that space of rib, space between rib, when you're touching your pet. And this is a good idea too, if whenever you're starting a diet, I typically have pets come in for monthly weight checks for the first 3 months after starting a diet to make sure that as we're staying on that diet, we're keeping an ideal body condition and then adjusting calories from there. Yeah.
I just want to make one quick comment. Dog food companies are in the business of selling dog food. Their label recommendations are in general double what your dog needs for the average dog. Double. Yep. Most dogs suffer from overnutrition, not undernutrition. So read those labels with a jaundiced eye. Be very careful.
And then lastly, I just wanted to touch a little bit on feed additives and supplements. So if a pet is receiving a complete and balanced diet, they should not require a supplement or any vitamin additive to their diet. It should all be within the food itself. But we want to make sure that if we're giving anything else, particularly calorie-wise, so who likes to give treats? I know I'm not the only one. Yeah, so say everybody raise your hands. Everyone does it. Just making sure that they're staying less than 10% of your dog's daily calorie intake, so that way we maintain that complete and balanced diet for your pet. And then also, I just wanted to touch a very tiny bit on the end, because I get this question a lot when we start talking about food sensitivities. food sensitivities are most commonly caused by the protein sources within food. Chicken, beef, pork, top 3 offenders almost each and every time. And I'm happy to chat about these in more detail. And I know Dr. Kara is going to do a nice allergy talk in a few months, and she'll go more into this in more detail at that time. But we're not typically worried about those other things within diets. Protein is one of the most important things that we're looking at when we're looking at dietary intolerances. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on are buzzwords. So especially with advertising today and social media, I see different things each and every day that are meant to draw the eye. They're meant to make you take a second look at that food and say, ooh, is that food better because it has X ingredient or has this descriptive word in front of it? So I wanted to break down what are the legal requirements for when people use these words on food, and what does that really mean? Because in some cases it means absolutely nothing. Which is really mind-blowing to me, because I think it means one thing, but in reality, it really doesn't mean anything. So senior, we touched a little bit about this. So it's not an AAFCO designated life stage. They don't have a set of nutrients that they are regulating specifically for our older pets, but there are diets that maintain a senior life stage, and those are all formulated to meet adult maintenance requirements, the senior diets. Premium or gourmet, absolutely no requirements there. You can put premium, slap it on any bag of food, and it means nothing. That can have the same ingredients as Alpo. They can be exactly the same. Sorry, that was, should have given a made-up example. Natural actually is legally defined. So with a natural label, a natural terminology on the label, it has to contain only natural ingredients without chemical alteration. So this is actually one that means something. So when you see that, it's meant to not have any chemical alteration. The only things that they will make an exception for are vitamins and minerals and things like that that are added to the diet. So that would be the only change there. Organic is not defined well within pet foods. Within human food groups, it's very well defined, where they have a set of what you have to do to have an organic label. But within pet foods, this isn't very well defined. They tend to just take what we know about human organic foods and translate that into pet foods. So not very well defined at this point.
Sorry, there is one company that produces a whole line of food called Organics that is named Organics that is technically not organic. But it's its name and it's not its label, so it's different. So you have to be really careful.
Sneaky. It's all in the terminology. It really is. Holistic has no legal definition and is unregulated. So holistic, again, is not a term that has any meaning to me in pet foods. It's a buzzword that people put on a label to draw you in and make you take a second look at their diet. And then human grade is actually not a term that's allowed on a pet food label unless it's made in a plant that is approved for manufacturing human foods. So that one actually does have a little bit of a legal terminology to it. Any questions, doctor, staff, anybody else that you would throw in, other buzzwords that I didn't touch on? These were the biggest ones that I could think of. You did awesome. Thumbs up over there? Okay. So I brought up an example. This is my foster puppy's food that she's eating right now, just to kind of go over a few different things together so that way we could see what we're looking out for. So this first picture is our, principal display label. So it has the name of the food. Down here it has the weight of the food. It has the manufacturer who made the food. And then it also says, what is the food for? So it's for a puppy.
It's only for smart puppies.
Yeah. She some days makes that. She's really sweet. I'm sorry, Tim, if you're listening. That's her real dad that's coming to get her. Soon to be dad. So the top portion has our feeding instructions, And then underneath is our list of ingredients. So the first ingredient is chicken. And then we have whole grain corn and then chicken byproducts. So they actually they're following some of the rules to make sure number one ingredient, and they're listing that it's their number one ingredient. And then underneath we have our guaranteed analysis. And then at the very bottom, we have a statement that says that IMS Proactive Health Smart Puppy dog food is formulated to meet the nutritional levels established by the AFCO dog food nutrition profiles. So that means that that is a laboratory analysis. That's not a feeding trial. That's how they make that description. And then it's meant for gestation, lactation, and growth, including growth of large-sized dogs. So that's the description of kind of how to break through, where does this information live, and what have I gained information-wise about this diet. So I know it's a puppy food, I know it's been studied in a laboratory analysis, and I know that my number one ingredient is chicken. So those are kind of what I'm looking for when I'm looking at foods. And these recommendations and things are all going to vary based on what your pet's lifestyle looks like, if they have any concurrent medical conditions, and that's where we have a really open conversations with your veterinarian to say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. This is the diet I'd like to try. What do you think? And then we'll break it down like this, and we'll go through it together and look more into the specifics of what levels of protein, what levels of carbohydrates, what levels of fat are important to us for your specific pet, because that varies a lot. And I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that information tonight, but just more, where do you look in this very confusing label? Because I mean, where's that Bright Minds bag? I mean, when you look at that bag of food, I don't know where that one even went. When you look at this bag of food, there is information everywhere. It is just covering the whole bag of food, and it's hard to know what is important. And these are the really important things for me.
I just wanted to point out really quickly, the ones that are labeled Smart Puppy or Bright Minds, almost all have, so Bright Minds for puppies has DHA added, which is what we add to human baby foods to make babies' neuronal pathways grow. So it's added to, I know, obviously Victoria's had those a lot. And I'm Smart Puppy, anything that says Smart Puppy Proactive, things like that are the ones that contain DHA, and that's why.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, DHA.
That's a really good thing if you have a growing puppy with a growing mind and you want them to be really smart. If you want them to be dumb, which is also easier.
All right. These are just a few areas where you can get more information on pet food nutrition, particularly interpreting pet food labels and what nutrition profile is appropriate for your pet. There's a lot of information, but these are some really nice starting points. And then any questions?
What about byproducts? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
We can talk a little bit about byproducts. So I think everyone hears the term byproduct and they immediately get scared. They're like, I don't know what that is. What is a byproduct? So byproducts to me, it's just a different way of getting nutrition to our pet, and it's the way that things are processed. And they're perfectly fine to be fed, particularly especially when we're looking to add things like protein sources within our diet. So it sounds like a scary word. It's just a different way of getting that nutrition into our pets.
I was just going to say, it's been marketed.
Yeah.
Byproducts have been marketed to be evil and horrible for your pets, but they really are, in many cases, a really good, cost-effective alternative to feeding pure protein. So they're feeding cleaned out GI tract, cleaned out organ meat. Don't be terrified by it. It's really not that bad. And again, most pets suffer from overnutrition, not undernutrition.
Yeah.
It's a cleaned out GI tract. Sounds like poop. It's cleaned out. Neutral.
But I was going to say,
So is there truly a difference in like small breed, large breed? formulas?
Small breed and large breed foods vary in composition, so they're going to have a variable protein carbohydrate percentage. And then also we're looking at formulation of kibble. Many times the small breed kibble is meant to be a smaller bite size, so it's easier for those animals to handle. But they can have a little bit differences in that protein and carbohydrate energy requirement, just depending on the diet. But it's more formulation than anything. So what does that kibble look like so that the pet can tolerate it a little bit more easily? Oh, singing the song
I have
of
a
his
question
people.
about calories per cup in pet foods, and typically that is not something that you'll find on a label. So how do you
Yeah.
handle making sure you're feeding the right number of calories?
It is not something that is legally required on pet food labels. It is something that more foods are including on their labels because clients are asking for them. So whenever I have a bag of food that I say, I don't know how many calories per cup, we can contact the company to find out directly. That's a really nice option. There are also I'll go back to one slide back. So on this, actually I didn't put the Pet Nutrition Alliance, sorry Dr. Pam. Pet Nutrition Alliance also has a list of pet foods and then the calories per cup. Knowing though that it can change a little bit if it's not a fixed formula. So that can vary a little bit just based on the diet. So on those where it's not clearly on the label, I contact the company, and that's the most accurate way to find out how many calories per cup you're going to find. If it is on the bag, though, typically it's underneath the nutritional, so it'll be within that information panel along the sides.
That being said, light dog foods can range anywhere from 230 or 40 calories per cup to over 400. So don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
What
Because
you may or may not have heard, because she didn't have the microphone, is that light foods and diet foods can range anywhere from 240 calories per cup to over 400 calories per cup. So you might be thinking you're giving a light or a diet food, and you're really not.
Because so for that legal requirement to say light, lean, anything like that, it's all based on how much per pound, how many kilocalories per pound of food. So depending on the food and the moisture content, you can feed very little and be at a pound pretty quickly. And that calorie count really adds up. Like, it's amazing to see some of these foods that it's like you're feeding half a cup and that's 350 calories. Your poor dog is starving.
What about limited ingredient and grain-free foods?
Again, these are really hard where it's not a well-defined term where they say this is the specific requirements that you have to meet to put that on your label. That to me is almost a meaningless term where they can just slap it on so many different things because it's not well defined, and I think it's a buzzword that people use to draw you in. Yeah.
If you're curious how much food to feed your pet, ask your veterinarian. Any one of my 5 doctors and most of my, 50 technicians could calculate calories for you for your pet based on how much your dog weighs, how much it needs to weigh, and they'll tell you exactly how much of the food that you are feeding to feed. And that truly is something that every single one of my staff, like all of my trained technicians, raise your hands. There are a lot of them here.
Yeah.
They can all calculate that for you in about 3 minutes if you just tell them how much your dog weighs, how much it's supposed to weigh, and what kind of food you're feeding. That being said, and obviously we need to know their activity level at the same time because your dog's clearly not my Charlotte Foster. There was one other thing. I can't remember what I was going to say, but I'll add it in later. Oh, limited ingredient and limited antigen. There is a really important reason to do a limited ingredient diet, and that is if we suspect that your dog has food allergies, we will tell you, feed your dog either 1 protein and 1 carbohydrate via a homemade diet or a bag of dog food, or we'll say use a food called ZD or HA, which are both, they're hydrolyzed proteins, so they're very, very tiny protein molecules that your dog doesn't recognize as a protein. If your dog's allergy symptoms clear up on a limited ingredient diet, meaning 1 protein, 1 carb, then we can safely say your dog has a food allergy, and then we just have to decide how to go about proving which one it is. But it has to be 60 to 90 days on that one food with nothing else going in its mouth.
No treats.
Which is really,
nothing.
really hard. I mean, honestly, it's almost impossible. I can just about guarantee I could never do that diet. I could never assure that nothing would go in Charlotte Foster's mouth except for a food. So be aware, and sometimes it's easier, faster, and cheaper to just do a food allergy test to find out what exactly they're allergic to and then have that to plan with.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Doctors, anything else you would add? But food is an interesting and ever-changing topic, and it's very interesting. If you have questions about your specific food, come grab one of us, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, everybody give Dr. Lindsay a really big hand. This is such an good job. I feel like every time we talk about pet foods and understanding pet food labels, I was telling these guys in the back, this is stuff that we don't know it until we come to something like this and we realize, oh my gosh, holistic means nothing. Next time you go to the pet store or your grocery store, take a look at how many bags of food you see those kind of labels on. And that sort of marketing that's meant to just assume that you're going to think, oh, this is the best thing to feed my pet. So thank you for educating us all. And I can't stress enough, if you guys have questions specifically about what you're feeding or want help picking something, that's what my staff is here to do for you. So we appreciate you coming tonight. We hope you'll join us next week. Next month in March, the first Tuesday.
Yes.
Did I say next week? Next month.
Next month.
Next month, first Tuesday of March, we have a very special guest speaker coming in from Colorado to talk to us about the importance of pet insurance and how to know whether or not pet insurance is right for you and your critters, how to decide what to pick, what it's going to pay for, what it's not going to pay for. So this is going to be fantastic information. If you or your friends or family are interested in a topic like this, tell them to join us here next month or tune in on Facebook Live. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.